make sure we are recording. We are recording. All right. Welcome, everybody, to Monster Monday. Today is June 29th, 2020, and I am your host, DM Gallibond. All right, everybody. Those of you who've been on the stream have been listening to the theme music, a few selections from Kevin MacLeod. You can find all of his stuff over at Incompetech. The titles here that we are using come from the Roll20 default jukebox, actually. He has contributed a lot of songs to that. And today is June 29th, 2020, and our monster tonight is the Thoughtbound Phantasm. We are continuing our look at monsters from the Magic the Gathering release expansion called Guilds of Ravnica. I'm your host, DM Gallibond, and as always, we want to spend special thanks out to Mo over at the Tabletop Bellhop. He's got everything you could possibly want about all kinds of tabletop games over there, so go check him out. All right, the Thoughtbound Phantasm is a creature, like I said, from the Guilds of Ravnica expansion for Magic the Gathering. It is a spirit that is associated with House Dimir. And the reason we're talking about it is that my highly hardcore homebrew Walker of Waterdeep campaign, where it's a planeswalking campaign where the PCs are going all to these different realms out of Magic the Gathering. When they went to Ravnica as part of an ongoing mission, this was a monster they met when a couple of the PCs were ambushed by House Dimir. Now, the Thoughtbound Phantasm is a spirit, and in the Magic the Gathering game, it's a defender, which normally means that it doesn't attack, except the Thoughtbound Phantasm has a little bit of a way around that based on some abilities that you use with other cards. So, in terms of its lore, the Thoughtbound Phantasm is integral to the Guild's espionage efforts. And knowledge is power for House Dimir. They basically thrive by going and stealing the secrets of all of the other guilds and knowing before even sometimes the higher ups of some of the other guilds. They know kind of what's really going on in the city and what's really going on in the heart of the guilds, and they use that to sort of their advantage. And the Thoughtbound Phantasm as a spirit creature, it kind of is part of the more the dark and dirty side of that espionage, because it kind of has an ability to sort of pull information out of the people it is examining, or at least that's how I have decided to make it in my version of the game. Basically, in Magic the Gathering, it just sits there as a defender for a while until it builds up effects, and then it starts attacking. So when you start carrying creatures from Magic the Gathering over to D&D, the creature types don't always line up one-to-one. There's no such thing as a spirit creature type in D&D, but there are undead, which include spirits, spirit creatures like specters and ghosts and things like that. And undead in D&D are once living creatures brought to a horrifying state of undeath through a practice of necromantic magic or some kind of curse. And then you have the corporeal undead, like your vampires and zombies, and then the spirits, like ghosts and specters. These are urban monsters. Ravnica is kind of a planet-sized city, covers almost all of the landmass of the planet, except for little areas that are called wastelands that are outside the limits of the city. And nearly all of the guilds, except for the Gruul clans, are based in the cities. The Gruul clans are the only guild that is based out in that wasteland area. So it's an urban creature. The Thoughtbound Phantasm is an urban creature just like everybody else in House Dimir. Um, and the flavor text, well, there's not really any flavor text on this card. Um, I just kind of like to imagine these sort of little spiritual tendrils. I like to think of those as like little spiritual tentacles that it can use to go out and just kind of worm its way into people's minds and get at different information. So then we'll take a look at the mechanical features. When I converted this over to D&D, what did I do? Well, now you'll notice that I deviated a little bit from my usual MO. Most of the time, you take the casting cost, which in this case is 1 mana, and add it to the toughness, which is 2, so 1 and 2. Normally, I would make it a CR3 monster. But actually, there's no CR3 incorporeal undead in the monster manual. Now, why do I limit myself to the monster manual? Well, that's because we play our game on Roll20, and I do not have the full catalog of official resources on Roll20 like I do on D&D Beyond. So if I'm going to customize a monster, I want to customize a monster out of the monster manual because I own that. And the Roll20 character sheet for monsters is very, very easy to modify. You can easily change around all the stats that you want, and it will just automatically update all the macros. And when you click on things, all your attacks work. You don't have to manually futz with stuff and everything. So until I build up more of my collection of source books on Roll20, I am going to stick with pulling things out of the monster manual. So the closest thing to a CR3 corporeal undead is actually the Banshee. And so that's a CR4. I went ahead and called it a CR3, even though it's a very tough CR3. But my characters, if I put my characters up against what um, the DM guide tells you is a hard encounter for their party level, my characters just mop up the floor with them. So they don't even break a sweat in trying to fight those things. So I always, even when I want to make the encounters somewhat challenging, I always throw at least a deadly encounter at them. So if I take a stat block of a CR4 monster and I call it a CR3, that's really not posing too much of a challenge for my characters in this game. So CR3, AC 12, 88 hit points, added 30 hit points to the standard Banshee, uses all the same stats, the flying speed, all the saving throws, same resistances, same immunities, both damage and condition immunities, same senses, and then it's not until you get to the attacks and you get to special abilities that you see where I've actually kind of customized it a little bit. So the Thoughtbound Phantasm, I changed one of its attacks to something called a Confusing Touch. Melee spell attack +8, so that's a little bit more of an attack bonus than the Banshee normally gets. It will do 12 or 3d6 plus 2 psychic damage. Now, normally the Banshee does necrotic damage on its touch attack. Then I changed one of its abilities to extract thoughts. And it's one creature instead of all creatures. Their Banshee kind of has this aura thing that goes out 60 feet, I think. Yes, 60 feet. The phantasm it can see must succeed on a DC 13 Wisdom save or suffer 1d4 intelligence damage and be stunned for 1 minute. A stunned target can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns with disadvantage if the phantasm is with line of sight, ending the effect on itself on a success. So this is not permanent, you'll never get it back intelligence damage, but this is the kind of intelligence damage that you regain 1 point of intelligence until you get back up to full every day. So if you get in a fight with one of these Thoughtbound Phantasms and it gets off a couple of its extract thoughts attacks on you, then you're going to be laid up for a while recovering your intelligence, especially if you're a spellcaster. Target saving throw is successful, the effect ends for it, and the target is immune to the phantasm's extract thoughts for the next 24 hours. And like I said, lost intelligence returns at the rate of 1 point per day. Then it's got a once a day shatter mind spell. Now the Banshee has this wail that can reduce you to 0 hit points. It's just outright, you're at 0 hit points. This is a little bit different. The Shatter Mind spell targets one creature it can see within 15 feet, has no effect on constructs and undead. Any other creature so targeted within 15 feet must make a DC 13 con save. On a failure, the target's intelligence score drops to 1. And on a success, the target takes 1d6 intelligence damage. So basically, this would be a great thing to throw at a wizard in your party. If you're the DM, just use this against the wizard. It's like, okay, now your wizard has an intelligence of 1. So it's like they can basically their brain can control their autonomic responses, can make them breathe and make their heart beat, and that's about it. Otherwise they just stand there and drool. Okay, Thoughtbound Phantasm special abilities. Detect minds. Now, the Banshee normally has detect life within 5 miles, and it's like, okay, 5 miles, that's a bit of a stretch for me. So, detect minds, Phantasm will magically sense the presence of intelligence creatures up to 500 feet away that aren't undead or constructs, and it knows the general direction they're in, but not their exact locations. And then, incorporeal movement. Phantasm can move through other creatures or objects if they were difficult terrain. Takes 1d10 force damage. Now that's taken just exactly from the Banshee's ability, that incorporeal movement. Okay, so that's how I created the creature for D&D. But what about going back to its roots in Magic the Gathering? I've always loved this game, but if I'm being honest, I'm not very good at it. Phooey. Okay. The stats are right here, but I screwed this up in the updating the text here. So a Thoughtbound Phantasm came from the 2018 Guilds of Ravnica set as an uncommon card. Artwork is by Johan Bodin. One of 143 creatures, 69 cards requiring blue mana, one of 34 cards casting one or costing 1 mana to cast, and one of 35 cards in the set that has the House Dimir guild mark. And the Thoughtbound Phantasm is also one of 487 cards across all the expansions since 1993 to have the word spirit as part of the subtype of the card. So, if the bars ever reopen and you're ever at trivia night and Magic the Gathering comes up, well, now you can answer some questions about the Thoughtbound Phantasm. Okay, so I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but how did I use this in the Walker of Waterdeep campaign? One of the PCs or one of the players thought that his character, when they got to Ravnica, was going to want to join House Dimir. So, based on what the players had told me they thought they were going to do in terms of being allied with a house in Ravnica, I decided which guilds I would focus on populating and having encounters and things with. Now, Dimir works in the shadows and the doesn't have a warm, fuzzy relationship with a lot of the other guilds, so they kind of have to be a little bit, cloak and dagger in the way they go about their business. And so, when my, Dimir prospect was searching around the city with another PC, kind of doing some scouting away from their diplomatic handlers, they actually walked into an alley, into an ambush by the House Dimir. Now, it was not the kind of ambush that's your money or your life, or they just start attacking. It was an ambush more of, oh, so you're with that group that we've seen around. Yeah. Shame if anything would happen to you, while you're here. And so they had a little bit of a conversation um, with the House Dimir, and it was a fair-sized party because I had actually constructed the ambush in the case that everybody in the party was there. It turned out to be just two of them there, and so it was one where when they offered to talk, the PCs were like, "Oh yeah, okay. There's a lot of enemies around. I think we'll just talk," instead of trying to fight their way out of it. When they weren't being attacked yet. So that was how I used that. So I really haven't thrown this at the PCs in anger. Now they will be back and forth to Ravnica in this campaign because um, their two main sets of contacts. One is in Waterdeep and one is on Ravnica, because that's kind of the two locations around which the action of the story revolves. And then the players kind of go on little missions, kind of like going out on spokes from the hub of either Waterdeep or of Ravnica, going out to these other planes and doing tasks and finding things and chasing stuff down and getting things done in that way. All right, so now we come to the Q&A portion of the evening. All right, I'm looking at the chat and I don't see any questions yet. I'm going to go ahead into the wrap up, then I'll come back and look at the chat because I know there's a bit of a delay. In case anybody has any questions about what I have done or how I approach the philosophy I have in terms of creating monsters out of Magic the Gathering for my D&D games. All right, as I said, I have been DM Gallibond. I do 2 actual play games on this Twitch channel in addition to Monster Monday. Thursday nights, Sword Coast Chronicles. That's kind of my homebrew light game. I like to say, I have learned that as long as I'm working 40 hours a week, I have time in my life to kind of do one hardcore homebrew game a week. So that's my Sunday game. And then if I'm going to do a second game, because I really like running multiple games, if I'm going to do a second game, it's going to have to be either exactly by the book or it's going to have to be homebrew light, as I say, where it's really minimal deviation from the story so that I don't have to do a whole lot of prep week to week from, stories I know, campaigns I've run before, this kind of stuff. Um, so that I can go and just run the games and have fun and not have to uh, constantly be building, uh, you know, building the set in front of the players as they decide whether they're going to turn right or left. Um, so, Walker of Waterdeep is that hardcore homebrew game on Sunday afternoon. That's the one that comes through here. And as I kind of alluded to, while they are in planes that are out of Magic the Gathering, every monster they face comes out of a Magic the Gathering card set, has the artwork and the name for the Magic the Gathering monster, and then I totally homebrew the stat block, but I take the guts of an existing monster, and then add a few bells and whistles, or I change some things around. If the closest thing I find is a celestial and it's supposed to be a fiend, well, then I swap out some of the powers. Radiant becomes fire, or or necrotic or whatever, so that I can go back and forth and mix things around. Uh, the key I found for creating these monsters for my players is to give them, make them something that the players can hit, because players love being able to hit shit. And it's fun to roll the die and say, "Oh wow, yeah, I clobbered that guy," and it's fun to roll damage and all that kind of stuff. So make it something they can hit, but give it a big old bucket of hit points so that they have to hit it a lot before it falls down. And then by the same token, if you're going to give it a whole lot of hit points, you can tune up the ability for it to hit the players, but don't tune up the damage if you're going to do that. Leave the damage pretty much at the same level that it was out of the um, out of the stat block. And so you'll see that I don't really change things like spell save DCs, even though some of them are kind of low. I don't change things like I usually don't change things like the amount of damage that a creature will do. I may sometimes change the number of attacks a creature gets, but if I do, I will change it so that the creature might get more attacks, but it'll maybe do slightly less damage from each attack than it normally would do in the D&D version. So I want to make them survival. I want to make them fun. I want to make them a challenge. But I don't want to set out to, every time they walk around a corner in a cave, the pack of goblins up there is going to just wipe the floor with them. That's no fun to do. Because then everybody's having to spend all the time recreating characters, and I don't want to put my players through that. I like to give them a chance to grow and expand their own characters and really develop them. Okay, well, it doesn't look like we have any questions for tonight. So, thank you all for coming and hanging out on the stream tonight. Once again, I have been DM Gallibond. You can find the archives of everything I do over on my YouTube channel. You can find recent stuff that I've done here on the Twitch channel. And we do have a Patreon. If you like everything we're doing, we ask you to subscribe on Twitch and subscribe on YouTube. Follow so you get notifications every time we go live, every time we post something new. Really, really appreciate all of that. Thank you, folks, very much. And as always, I'll just remind you to watch out for the monsters under the bed. Good night, everybody.